My name is Mick Harcourt, and I was born in the UK in 1952, and I emigrated to Australia in 1977. So you can tell by my accent that I am originally from the north of England. Whenever I go back to the north of England, they say to me, "You don't now sound like an Australian." I said, "Not in Australia, I don't." Okay, so I joined the Royal Aero Club in 1988, and I served as club captain from 2000 to 2010. Some of the Aero Club movement things that I've been awarded has been the Federation Award. I was also made a life member of the Royal Aero Club in 2013. I was drawn to flying as a young child. I had some relatives that lived in a town called Darlington, and we used to go past on the train an ex-RAF station called Middleton St George, and at the front they had a Hurricane and a Spitfire, and I thought these things were absolutely fabulous. I wanted something to do with these things. But I remember being totally disinterested in the countryside, and all I could do was wait to see these aeroplanes. They were well past their heyday, especially given that the replacements of a more modern silver-looking swept wingback and noisy aeroplanes such as the Vampire and whatnot back in those days, of course. As most young men do, I got on with life. I was married in '75, served my apprenticeship as a fitter and turner, got all that done. As I say, emigrated to Australia in 1977. My wife and I had 2 children, and unfortunately we split. As I say, I was in limbo for a little while. I played in bands and played music for many, many years, and with the amount of money that we made out of the house sale, we split the money, and I thought, I've got to do something really important, invest this into a new house or something like that, or into a business. So I learned to fly instead. It was the obvious choice, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. I joined the Royal Aero Club in August '88 and had my first lesson the 5th of August in Cessna 152 Bravo Foxtrot Tango. No tip for me, straight into effective controls. In fact, the instructor, Al Unger, he left the employ of the Aero Club the next day. Well, I got the last day. I was going to say after the next line, which was, I don't know whether it was because I was trying to pull this beast around the sky and make a real mess of it, but anyway, it was all good. Moving on to Tuesday, the 13th of September of that same year, 1988, I was driving my vehicle, and I got hit by a bus coming through a stop sign. And as you can see, that's the resulting damage. He caught me just behind the door, and I was lucky I managed to get out of it with a few little scratches and bruises, but kept me mildly traumatized for a little while. I could barely drive a car, let alone learn to fly an aeroplane. However, I did what most did and just got on with it. A little bit slower on the uptake, and on the 2nd of November 1988, JD might not remember this, but in Romeo Whiskey Foxtrot, John Douglas sent me for my first solo. So that was over 30 years ago. And both John is still here and the aeroplane's still here as well at the front there, which speaks volumes for both. The following year I gained my RPPL, which is a restricted private pilot's license, in March '89, and less than 2 weeks later started my aerobatics training, completing it in May with Rob Turner. I don't know if any of you remember Rob Turner. He was an instructor here. They used to call him Rob Tailskid Turner. I won't go into the reasons why they called him Tailskid Turner, but it was something to do with bashing the back end of a 152 on the ground somewhere. Anyway, the following month I started my tailwheel training in the Club Tiger Moth, the then Club Tiger Moth Foxtrot Alpha Sierra. My first impressions? That picture was taken by Martin Cowell, for those of you that know Martin Cowell, at Murrayfield some years back. My first impression on the Tiger Moth, and see why we don't fly these things anymore. Don't think it had a mind of its own. No matter what input I made, it just went off in every single direction. Anyway, after many hours and dollars, I gave up. I just stopped flying it because I was spending too much money trying to get on top of it. I carried on flying 152s, 172s, and attending the competitions and taking people for flights, keeping my hours up, so they say. February 1991, I was chatting with the late John Bird, and I was a little bit miffed because I'd seen a friend of mine who really wasn't interested in the Tiger, but he'd soloed in the Tiger after a couple of hours, and I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So John said, I can get you solo within a couple of hours, and he did. He took me up, he did this and did that and did the other, and he said, set me off solo. So I thought, this is great. First solo in a Tiger Moth. I landed, and in those days we used to put the flying helmet with the goggles, with the headsets, put it over the top of the joystick when you finished flying. Yep, no problem, put it on there. Went upstairs, had a cup of coffee, thinking I'm an ace pilot. Next thing, somebody comes looking for me. Apparently I'd left the radio on the ground frequency at Jandakot, and the helmet had pushed the talk button down and jammed the frequency on the ground for half an hour. So the ace pilot got a kick at the backside and never did it again. Okay. So it was that I enjoyed the use of the RPPL, the Restricted Private Pilot's License, which in those days was virtually an area restriction within 5 nautical miles of the aerodrome or within the confines of the training area. Slightly different now, but back then you were really restricted as to where you could fly, and I didn't really have the money to do my full PPL. There you go, there's the chipmunk. And I believe Mr. Foster is there. You'll recognise that area. Lynn's old place up at York. Anyway, I commenced my formation training with Werner Bullman on the 6th of July 96 and was signed out as proficient. So I flew so many formation sorties in the training area. I used to fly around in the training area and all the guys would say, right, we're going over the city now, and I'd just do circles and wait for them to come back and rejoin up again. And I thought, blow this for a game of cowboys, so eventually I ended up doing my PPL. And the first flight I did was in CKF, which is owned by the club and used by the club now. Chucked a sleeping bag and a 6-pack of Swan Lager in the back of the aeroplane and flew it out to York just after I got my PPL. Got to Lynn Foster's and I said, right, I'm going to do the roughing, lie on the ground, sleeping bag under the wing. And he said, oh, I've just killed 2 big dugouts, one of them in the hangar and one of them just outside the hangar. So persistent I might be, but brave I'm not. So I slept on their lounge that night. So there you go. I learned a very important lesson coming back from Lynn's that day, because I hadn't done any navigation exercises in the Tiger Moth and therefore used the old compass that was there. And when I took off from there was a mist going, so I just used the sun behind me and used the Force, as in Star Wars, use the Force, Luke. I used the Force as my navigation exercise, to which I thought, this is really silly. And I was just so lucky that after so many minutes, maybe a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, I could actually see Mount Dale. And I did the same thing when I got to Mount Dale, just guessed the angle that I would have to be to get to Canning Dam. And I'd done so many hours in the training area, I had about 300 hours up in the training area. I thought, once I get to Canning Dam, I know exactly where I am. I did it, I got away with it, and I swore never to do it again. I did it one more time and I didn't get away with it, and I'll get down to that shortly. Okay, so now I can follow the boys and go anywhere, do Albany, do Beverley, do Geraldton, whatever. So we did quite a few jollies all over the place. One of the biggest things we did was the Australia Day on January 26th. Our first participation was in 1998 with a Cessna 152 Diamond 9, and I've subsequently flown it in Tiger Moths and Chipmunks over the ensuing year. One year I did a display from 7,500 in the Tiger, and while it was 30 degrees plus on the ground, it's bloody freezing where I was up there, gotta tell you. February 1999 was another milestone for me, my first landing at Langley Park in the Tiger Moth Foxtel Sierra. It's probably the most proud and humbling moment of my flying life, not something I'd ever planned for or thought of at the beginning. I was doubly lucky in doing 2 landings there, because we did a formation display with Nigel Emmons in his aircraft, November India Golf, and Clark Rees in his, at the time, which was Bravo Tango Papa. So we got 2 landings, which was great. In 1999, JD asked if I would be interested in helping the late Bill Williams in the club captaincy. So I said, yeah, okay, can't be much to this. Famous last words. So Bill wasn't as well as he could have been, but still a force to be reckoned with, of course. However, his retirement to that club office was on the cards. So I started organising fly-ins, comps, etc. as vice captain, and was gradually raised to the lofty rank of club captain in September of 2000 at the AGM. Now, the reason I mention it this way is because I don't know why I was so eager to hear the results, because I was the only idiot that had nominated for it. So I got it. I held that position for 10 years to 2010. It was a doozy. I was introduced to so many people, got to know so many people. Yeah, so there's some faces that you probably haven't seen for a little while, and I don't know if you guys remember those good people. I'd love to say that I initiated this, or started this, or did this, but I don't think I did. I think I just kept an interest in the flying at the time, and I think I kept an interest with the members in flying at the time, and I think we maintained a healthy membership during my tenure back then. the encouragement was to encourage people into the comps on a monthly basis, as well as WALACs. And I also kept my flying committee team healthy by, happy, should I say, by delegating responsibilities and attending most of the functions that was as humanly possible. Werner Bullman gave me a great deal of support, as did the staff around the club. He gave me some advice that I still remember, and I regard highly today. We had a fly into for injury once, and the weather was marginal. And of course, I had 1,000 hours in my logbook by then, and I traipsed off in a 152 with a friend of mine's son. And it was marginal all the way, but I was getting him to send text messages back saying, yeah, it's great here, it's great there, the cloud base is down to here, cloud base is down to there. Eventually, nobody rocked up for another 2 hours after me because they weren't happy about the weather. And on the way back, somebody actually had an accident, or an incident, should I say. As a result of this, Werner said to me, you have to remember that I might have 1,000 hours, but I'm leading people that have only got 100 hours. And with that in mind, you have to fly to their capabilities, not to your capabilities. And that was an extremely good piece of advice he gave me, and I've done that ever since if I've had to lead off anyway. During my tenure as club captain, I was flying Chipmunk Romeo Whiskey India to the Newdigate Agricultural Show, and this is where the force comes in for the second time. Okay, now Werner was going to be using this at Newdigate for dry flights, etc. So I was using the force to get to my destination. I had a map with me. I didn't have my glasses with me. I couldn't read the map properly. The guy in the back was going to be doing all the navs, but it turns out that he didn't know what was happening. So I lost my position where I was, over Narrogin somewhere, and stooged around. And eventually, after coming into contact with low cloud, bad weather, I made a precautionary landing. But in the interim, I contacted Perth, and they said, oh, there's an Ansett flight. That shows you how long ago this was. There's an Ansett flight in the area, and he's going to give you an idea of where you might be. I said, okay, fair enough. So next thing, there's this Ansett 123, let's say. Romeo Whiskey India, do you copy? I said, yes, copy, Romeo Whiskey India. Romeo Whiskey India, we've been told of your predicament. What's your current position? I've actually put little X's on here with the reply that I gave to him. I thought there may have been a few ladies here, but I did say if I knew that I wouldn't ask him, would I? You know, idiot. And that was kind of the end of the conversation, because I think the hostie must have come in and gone, do you want a cup of coffee? Yeah. What about this bloke? Oh, don't worry about him. He'll fuck himself. Anyway, I put it down in the paddock in about a 35 knot crosswind, and I was just so pleased that I managed to get the airplane down in one piece that when I took the brakes off, the wind started blowing me across this paddock. There was a long story attached to it. I won't go on about it, but I landed in a paddock not far from a place called Ongerup, which was 58 nautical miles south of where I should have been going. Only because I saw a great big lake ahead of me and thought, that's Lake Grace. But it wasn't, it was Lake Dumbleyam, I found out afterwards. And this is a massive country, and if you get it wrong, you can get it really wrong. I was lucky, I got away with it. But that's the last time I ever used the force, because after that, somebody bought me a GPS. So I use a GPS everywhere now, and I use an app. I did a recent flight from Broome to Geraldton through Newman, and we, my other half, who was also a pilot, she was using all the electronic gear, and I brought about 6 maps with me, and I'm opening these white charts in the aeroplane. Oh, this is where we are. So what are you doing that for? I've got it on here, you've got a little iPad. Nah, old style. In July 2000, I organised the Beverley Air Show, and was absolutely miffed at the amount of organising of not only pilots and aircraft, but the ground logistics, as well as liaison with CASA for approvals, etc. It went off without any major hitches, and I was surprised at the reaction from some very professional pilots who really didn't know me, but were prepared to take part and display at the air show. The evening before, I flew a Tiger Moth over Beverley en route for the air show, and I had a smoke system set up. So I set the smoke going around, did a few laps around Beverley, and later that evening in the pub, all the locals were grumbling and moaning about some Spitfire doing local flights, so I didn't say anything, kept my mouth shut. My logbook tells me that on the 30th of September 2001, I took Bob Murphy for a fly in the Tiger Moth to Serpentine, in formation with 4 other aircraft. Amazing the names that pop up when you look through there. In July 2002, I was on holiday in the UK and decided to have a fly around the local area. I had a current logbook with me at the time, as well as my medical certificate. So I did a couple of flights up in the north of England. I also went down to Headcon in Kent, and I flew Golf AC/DC, which was at the time the oldest flying Tiger Moth in the world. So I was quite miffed by that, because that was from my humble beginnings. 2003, I did the great Tiger Moth air race from Rutherford, which meant we had to fly the Tiger Moths over there, but that's a story for another time that Brian wants me to fill in with that one. In March 2004, I received my low-level Aero's endorsement, again with JD, a waiver down to 1,500 feet that allowed me to compete with the Australian Light Aircraft Championships, which I managed on very fluky times to get at least 3 of them, and I also managed to win against the Kiwis at one stage. But one of the funny parts about that was that when we first went over to Newcastle, I just got this 1,500-foot waiver, and I was flying a decathlon, which I'd never flown before. And so with the instructor, I said, okay, we'll do some upper air work, and we did some upper air work stalls and steep turns and everything. I said, do you mind if we do some aerobatics? And he said, no, go for it. So I'm just loops and rolls, and he said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm doing some aerobatics, as I asked. He said, but we're only at 2,000 feet. And I said, but I've got a 1,500 waiver. He said, but I haven't. Which I didn't see the problem. But in my role as club captain, which by now was firmly established, I had to complete this is a good story, a right-hand seat endorsement in order to air judge at the competitions, which we have on a monthly basis here at Jandakot and at Murrayfield. And of course, we had a couple of interesting situations. We had one member who consistently would try and hit the numbers by having the nose high up in the air, the stall warning going off, and from about 50 feet up, and he'd just try and stall it on the numbers to get the maximum points. And I was saying to him many times, you can't do it that way, you've got to do it this way. Anyway, he and I had an argument one time, and I said, I'm never going to fly with you again as long as a certain part of your anatomy points to the ground. Never, ever will I fly with you again until you get that fixed. Anyway, a couple of months later he comes back and he said, can I fly with you? And I said, well, what about what we did? And he said, I've just done an AFR, and the instructor I flew with said that my technique is absolutely incredibly wrong. He said I should have been doing it the way you told me to do it. So there you go. The second one was, we had this guy who was a foreign bloke, and he was a nice guy, and he was really on top of the 152. There was no problem with it. And we do what they call a right-hand seat circuit. Now, if you've always flown from the left-hand seat, you've never flown the right-hand seat, the push we pull you works the other way around. Right? So he didn't know where to push and pull. We came in, all the way around the circuit, he was not on top of the aeroplane, and we came down and he dropped the aeroplane from about 20 feet, bounced, nearly hit the lights at the side of the runway. So I took control and landed the aeroplane properly, and we taxied off, and as he taxied, he puts his arm around me and goes, oh, Mick, he said, you saved my life. And I said, I saved my life first. And I said, I saved the aeroplane second. And you just happened to be sitting there, pal, that's it, that was the end of that. And we never saw him again after that. So, but never mind, you get that. In June 2006, I had the honour of flying the late Dick Sass, whom many of you will know, in the Tiger Moth for a Bomber Command flight. After which he thanked me for bringing him back safely, if not a bit colder than he expected, and gave the gathering pilots a talk on his long and extensive flying career in the Air Force. The ALACs are held around the country every year, and it falls on WA every 10 years. We've just had one recently, but I wrote all this, prepared all this before the last ALACs. So that particular time, it was a stinking hot day 10 years ago. This is in 2009. I had a great team to help me, support me, and I gave myself the job of a barman, barbecuer, entertainer, map consultant, taxi guide, taxi driver, viewing platform, tour guide, troop inspector, all this, and I was actually competing as well. So against Kiwis who didn't mind the 39-degree heat. Anyway, I organised the layout of everything. Overall, the thing that I learned the most from holding ALACs at Murrayfield, under the guise of the Royal Aero Club, was to next time hold it somewhere else, because it was just too hard. So we did it some time this time, and it went off extremely well. Okay, so I started participating in the late 90s in the Perth Sky shows on Australia Day, again in 3 different aircraft. And I remember in one time, one of my logbooks, it shows that I did nearly 3 hours flying in less than 4 hours with 3 different aircraft. Starting with the Tiger, I was number 1 of 12 aircraft. then a 152, number 7 of 18 aircraft, and then back in the Chipmunk for number 3 of 6 aircraft. Landing around 7:30 p.m., cleaning the airplane down, and then scooting up the freeway because before 50,000 cars want to go back in the same direction as you, and whatever. I'll sum up my experience as a private pilot with the Royal Aero Club. I have to say that I've tried to remain loyal without straying too much. And this has given me a wealth of knowledge, friendship, and a camaraderie that I'd never dreamed of. My tenure as club captain opened a few doors for me, not financially, but certainly psychologically. Because you've got to remember, I came from a working class background up in the north of England, and mixing with people that flew aeroplanes was far from my station. I never even mixed with people that washed aeroplanes back in those days. And I made a ton of very loyal and capable friends, and only a few enemies, and very few of them have poked their head up and had a go at me. My two biggest thrills were landing at Langley Park and receiving the honour of life membership from the Royal Aero Club. For one, I was sitting down in the aeroplane and landing, and the other one I was lying down after a hip operation. So there you go. All this said, let me make it clear that I would not have achieved this level of experience if not for the encouragement and support of the Royal Aero Club, of WA, its committee, professional flying and administration staff, including JD, Werner Bullman, Trevor Jones, Dave Curry, Coral Beer, and all. I'd not, however, enjoyed it so much if it wasn't for the members and their encouragement, participation in events over the years, and of course, the flying. What else can we do? If you've never been to Tiger Moth before, I don't know whether you want to put this up or not. It's just a 5-minute thing in the of a circuit. The girl is called Cheryl Simpson. She's actually a commercial pilot now. She flies somewhere down in Albany or Esperance. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for your time, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I've bored you, and I hope I've given you some information as to what it's been like flying with the Royal Aero Club for the last 30 years. My ups and downs, my ins and outs and everything. Cheers.